please join me in welcoming the Honorable Mayor Cory. All right.
An introduction like that, I was thinking to myself, I wish my mama was here, but my mama's here. And not only my mama, but I'm blessed to have a number of my Newark mothers here too. This wonderful lecture series of a woman of profound dignity, who I will talk about in a second, really compelled me to think hard about how fortunate I am to have such inspiring, strong elders in my life, females who are not just mothers to me, but have been mothers to the entire city of Newark. Their capacity to love has challenged me to grow, to heal, to stretch, to have courage in my love. So I'd like to just real quick ask 4 of the most dignified women in the city of Newark to be recognized. First, Minister Mamie Lee. Would you please stand up for the West Ward? Miss Lee scares me sometimes, threatens me sometimes, had me a busy mare. She told me I was going to come out on Central Avenue in Newark and register voters, and I sat there on a table as if I was still a college student, and she said, "You're never too big, never too important to sit down here and do the true work of a real revolutionary and register people to vote." So thank you. The next person I would like to introduce is Miss Ann Davis. Would you please stand up, Miss Davis? Ms. Davis' spirit testifies every single day, every single hour, that I may be a little gray, I may have slowed down a little bit, but God ain't through with me yet. And I am going to continue to serve as long as God gives me breath in my body. Every single day, she is out doing something for somebody. She works humbly, but with a determination that echoes throughout City Hall, because one of the places I find her most often is in my office. Thank you. The next person I would like to introduce is Miss Lorraine Lavender. Would you please stand up with your fine-looking self? She is a woman of extraordinary presence, and if you were a lion, she would truly be the king of them all. She is a woman who has probably been one of the longer-standing tenant activists in the city of Newark. She fights for justice not only for the place in which she lives, but she believes that you can never be free until everyone's free. And she believes that we're all caught in a common struggle for justice for people that live in multi-dwelling units. And to me, you are every single day, every time I see you, an inspiration. Thank you. And then the final woman who's here, who please do not be mistaken by her size. I may tower over her in physical stature, but her spirit is larger than anyone I know. She has taken care of me quite literally since I was a Yale Law School student, one of the first friends I had in the city of Newark. And she is the one that I always say that I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD from the city of Newark. She is indeed my greatest professor there is. And she has showed me that life can deliver you the most savage of hits. It can take you to your knees. But you will always be defined not by what happens to you, by the courage you have to stand up again and keep fighting. She was the tenant president for the entire history of Brick Towers, where I lived for 8 years, a building that was founded and built the year I was born. She is, like none other, one of the greatest Americans I know, Miss Virginia Jones. So forgive me for dwelling here for a moment, but I'm very blessed. I have friends that are old, like Gregory, who literally carried me down a mountain in the French Alps when I stumbled and yanked my ankle. I was too busy running around singing The Sound of Music, and suddenly the sound became very discordant. And to friends who've been in my life very purposefully, members of my staff who are here, tremendous individuals who do all the hard work, frankly, of which I take all the credit, and I'm grateful for them. And they've dealt with me this last week, where I have been a very difficult man to deal with as I rush to do my normal work, but also prepare for this speech. But this lecture series, for a reason that is very, very profound to me personally, is called the Toni Morison Lectures. I had the privilege of meeting Toni Morison for the first time in Newark very recently on the stage of NJPAC. And I am not one of those people who gets starstruck. But as I approached her, I felt myself get a little nervous as I felt someone who touched me so long ago in my life when I began reading her books on the recommendations, frankly, of my mother. And as I poured through her books, she spoke, even though she's a fiction writer, she spoke with a truth that was so penetrating and so poignant. She spoke to the truth of the American soul, the unfinished business, the pain and the brokenness that still is, in many ways, America. But the powerful thing about reading her works is that she took the broken pieces of an individual or even of a nation, and she found a way by telling her story of weaving those pieces back together and returning you more whole and more strong. You are truly God's gift to the city of Newark, to the United States of America, and to our globe for what you are doing for engendering the largest and most important emotion that there is, the largest force for constructive change and for healing. You are a force of God's love, and I thank you. So I have lots of friends here. I've said I see some old friends in the back who worked with me as I was working to campaign. I see some friends in the front like Miss Gail King, who always looks spectacular. But I want to give one last nod to two men who are here, Cornel West and Eddie Glaude. I am in a job that is 24/7. Sometimes it feels longer than that. You go home, and sometimes there are folk waiting for you. You get up in the morning, and there's folks there. It's a lot of challenges, but I carved out a space for myself that about once a month, and I miss from time to time, I come down to Princeton to sit at a table of some other black men. And we sit, and we talk, and we are loud. and sometimes I wonder how the restaurant puts up with us. But it is a time for me where they listen, where they challenge me, where they celebrate life, where they soothe my soul, where they also instruct me. And I've learned more sitting at that table about a range of topics, from jazz to actual policy on a national and international scale. Their words, I'm a plagiarizer and I admit it sometimes, their words have infused themselves in so many of my speeches and so many things I say. I've read both of their men's books, and I tell you, they have both challenged me, informed me, and helped me become a better person. So I am grateful to these two men because I know that they were the provocateurs to this very lecture series and my being here at this present. So gentlemen, thank you very much, Dr. West and Dr. Glaude. Thank you. So that was I got 3 nights, so I'm taking my time, so forgive me. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be competing with some individuals that I now feel qualified to be amongst, but for some reason I was not invited to the vice presidential debates, so I will be here with you tomorrow. But I would like to, if I may, jump into a presidential moment. You see, I today want to talk about this larger aspect of the spirit of America. I want to have an honest conversation about our country, about our people, about our past, and importantly, as I point to the next 2 lectures, to our future. So let me take you, though, to this moment that I was in Invesco Field, Mile High Stadium, and I was bouncing around and having a great time. I was doing so many interviews that day. I did interviews with everybody from Jamie Foxx on satellite radio, who had me cracking up, I could barely talk, to everybody from Fox News to News 12 New Jersey. I enjoyed News 12 New Jersey much more. And then suddenly we had Jennifer Hudson come up, and she sang the stuff out of the Star-Spangled Banner. And when she sang, suddenly it activated something in me. Now, I'm one of those people, I have to confess to you, that gets misty when I hear the Star-Spangled Banner. I've even known to cry at times when I just hear the Pledge of Allegiance. And sometimes when I was a councilman, the meetings were so difficult that I didn't enjoy many of them. But that moment when we heard the sound of the national anthem, when we heard Whitney Houston, a Newarker, sing those words, I would find myself getting emotional. But this was something different. I was a young man, a young American, standing in a packed arena, a packed stadium. And there was Jennifer Hudson singing. And this time I felt myself not being able to control my tears, and I started wiping them and saw all the press around me, and people started taking pictures, and I tried to compose myself, but I felt it. And this time, though, I wasn't feeling overcome with emotion because of myself and thoughts about myself. I was becoming overcome with emotion a bit because of thoughts about my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents, and began to dwell on the story of my family and the story of America. And in bits, what this moment meant, that Jennifer Hudson there was singing the national anthem at this time in this moment of history. I have to say, Gwen Ifill, who's going to be moderating the debates, I got up with her, and we had a little time before her interview on PBS started, and she saw me looking a little emotional, and I said to her, I just started going off and waxing about how powerful this moment is. I started talking about my mom and my dad and telling her how I was feeling a little weepy. And then like an older sister, she looked at me hard, and she says, "Don't you cry on my show." And she snapped me out of it, and I got back into my. I almost wanted to hug her for saying that, so I didn't go on national TV, a little bit of a weepy one. But I want to tell you this, that I have in my life also, while I find myself so full of a patriotic fervor, now that I'm a politician, I sometimes think a little deeper about it. Because in my younger days especially, I got a little frustrated and a little skeptical about shows of patriotism, especially from elected officials, that sometimes to me seemed to take on a form of pandering. It seemed to be a narrow type of patriotism, a shallow type of patriotism, where we seem to get more obsessed with flag pins on lapels than the truth and the depth and the nature of what it means to be patriotic. I believe then, and even more now, that to be an American patriot necessitates a tremendous amount of the American spirit, and especially two elements of that spirit, which simply are courage and love. Part of that courage and love is about the present and about the future, but the kind I want to dwell on a little bit now is the kind of courage and love it takes to examine our history, to examine it with an unflinching eye, to look at the bright high ground of American history, but more importantly, the shrouded darker corners. It's in those darker corners that I believe, the ones that we gloss over, ignore, that lies the secret to, I think, a deeper, more mature, more profound patriotism. Patriotism, I believe, necessitates a courage and a conviction to pierce the mythology of America, to undo the lies that are too often perpetuated by those who feel they're extolling our nation, but instead, really, they're causing it injury. True patriotism necessitates engaging in a continual, active analysis of who we are and who we have been as a people. I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize it perpetually. That was James Baldwin who said that. And it makes me immediately think, again, about my parents. One, because they criticize me perpetually. I kissed my mom this afternoon before I drive down, and the first thing that comes out of her mouth, not "Hi, son," not "How you doing, good luck on the speech." She's like, "Your breath is horrible." I'm not lying. The truth. We're talking about the truth today, Mom. So I sat at a table as a child, growing up, where my parents forced me to confront this paradox. They talked so honestly about our country, but yet they evidenced such profound love of country. That paradox of honest critique, often an exposure at my dinner table, listening to their stories of the ugliness of America, coupled with a love, was my first lessons in true patriotism from two people who manifested it, in my opinion, at every turn of their lives. My parents were both born in difficult circumstances. My father hates when I talk about it because, son, why you keep telling people I was a bastard? That's his language. But my father was born to a single mother in the mountains of North Carolina in a viciously segregated town. He tells stories about his childhood that were horrifying to me as a little boy growing up with ideals of America. He told stories about a town that really came together to rescue him from the challenges of walking a segregated world, but also from the challenges of poverty. My dad, who is a man of great humor, used to say, Cory, I couldn't afford to be poor. I was just Po, P-O, couldn't afford the other two letters. Poor and black, born to a single mother who needed help taking care of him. Both my parents were sent off to college, one to North Carolina Central University, the other to Fisk University. My father still talks to this day about this gratitude he felt to individuals who pooled their money together, folks that did not have that much resources, to ensure that he had the money to go to college. My parents landed there in the civil rights movement, and again, I'm sitting around my table as a little boy, listening to them honestly talk about the viciousness that they witnessed during that movement, witnessing the realities of having people kick you and spit at you and beat you just because you wanted to sit at lunch counters. The realities of marches that ended often in savagery. The stories that they told to a little boy growing up, coupled with this love of country, was such a deep lesson. My very emergence into the state of New Jersey reflected that. Both of my parents working through the Urban League to become some of the first blacks hired by numerous companies. My father, the first African-American salesman for Sinclair Oil Company, the first buyer for Woody's, a department store in Washington, D.C. They involved in these civil rights organizations, and the time came where they both were working for IBM as a wave of IBM's first African Americans. They got a job in northern New Jersey, and the stubborn righteousness of my parents made them want to continue to be active, so they began to test the real estate laws in New Jersey. And here my brother and I were just babies, but yet they would show up at real estate agents to meet with them, and real estate agents would steer them away from white neighborhoods. If they insisted on meeting the real estate agents at the house, as soon as they saw that my parents were black, they would immediately tell them the house was sold or off the market. My parents told me this story that almost seems too incredible to be real to me as a child growing up actually in this town. But when they found a house they loved in Harrington Park and were told that the house was sold, they got a white couple to go right afterwards, thanks to a storefront operation at the time called the Fair Housing Council, to go look at the house. The white couple, ironically, was Mr. and Mrs. Brown, but they weren't brown, they were white. And they went to the home, and indeed the house was for sale. On the day of the closing, after the Browns made a bid on the house, on the day of the closing, my father showed up with a young Jewish lawyer from the Fair Housing Council. And immediately when they confronted the real estate agent about that he was in violation of New Jersey fair housing law, the real estate agent stood up and slugged the lawyer and sigged the dog on my father. The story was incredible as I listened to it as a boy, having my father fight off a dog and having this melee break out that ended with the real estate agent in tears begging my parents not to move in the town that I was going to grade school in. My parents told me about an eventual court case and a threatening of the owners of the house who soon came back to the table and sold the house to my parents and had my brother and I and my parents growing up, as my dad affectionately called us, the 4 raisins in a tub of vanilla ice cream. But this was my parents. They didn't seem to harbor anger or hatred for having to endure such awful exhibitions of Americans. They seemed to have a transcendent love that not only loved their country, but loved the good and the bad. My mom was so determined she's going to love it until it became a good country, or a great country, or a better country. When she saw examples, or my dad saw examples of something that was wrong, they unleashed the power of their love. And so as I was growing up, my examples of patriotism began to be understood as people who had the courage to tell the truth, who didn't give pronouncements of sort of a palliative washing over or whitewashing of our history. Instead, they told the truth. And to me, they began to unlock one of the greatest themes of our country. Courageous individuals who are willing to challenge us to always see America's realities in the hope that America could become and be square with what they witnessed and rise up to who we must be. One of the most powerful stories of this through history didn't simply come from my parents, and my parents were actually phenomenal in letting me know that they were not extraordinary people whatsoever, that in their families and their experiences, they actually were the norm of their circles. But a powerful example of this is a woman named Mamie Till Mobley. She was a woman who was the mother of a young man named Emmett Till. Emmett Till was in the South, and through one words with a white woman, was savagely beaten and killed and murdered. On the day of her funeral, Miss Mamie Till Mobley kept the coffin open. She wanted to expose the truth of her child. She said in months before she was dead, she said, "People have told me to let this thing die, even people in my own family, but people need to be aware of the truth." She continued to speak about her son, and the press took pictures of Till with a bullet in his head, an eye gouged out, his head practically crushed, his body, which had been floating in the river, identifiable only by the ring that he wore that belonged to his late father. It was these images that shocked the consciousness of our country. It's the truth that was told that roused people to a deeper, greater, more courageous, more active love. It makes the point and asks the questions of how can we ever deal with the complexities of our present day if we don't have the courage to engage in the complexities of our common story as Americans. We cannot be a country built on self-deception. A reluctance to confront the truth will forever undermine American excellence, will inhibit our ability to successfully grapple with the problems of today. We must be engaged in a proactive courage, in a proactive love within our history and within ourselves, so that we begin to manifest the truth of our country, to deal with its unfinished business. There was a great man who once said, to engage in this Socratic questioning of America is not to trash our country, but rather to tease out those traditions in our history that enable us to wrestle with the difficult realities we often deny. Thank you, Brother West. These traditions are invaluable to our pursuits today, but they also offer us a true picture of our country, a true picture of the greatness of who we are. And so I say now more than ever, there is such a high price to pay for cheap American patriotism, a patriotism that lacks any critical analysis, that lacks a firm confrontation of the uncomfortable, of the inconvenient, and even the unacceptable truths of our nation. Cheap American patriotism denies the invaluable lives lived by Americans who faced and often fell victim to those streams in our culture that are so contrary to our American spirit. We must have the courage to speak of America, to tell the truth of our story, a truth that is not exclusively glorious battles or shining light only on a select group of individuals, but a story that is inclusive. The dangers of not telling our truth is American arrogance and not American enlightenment. The dangers of not telling our truth is American narrowness and not the broad-based understanding and wisdom necessary for a country's greatness. If we do not tell the truths about ourselves, then we truncate our capacity to love ourselves as individuals and a collective nation. It leads people to believe further that the margins of American society played little role. The marginalized had little to do with this country in comparison to the select group of central characters. When in fact, if you look at the truth of our nation, it is those people who are most sought to be marginalized, who have consistently called to our nation's consciousness, who have challenged our country to expand the very nature of its democracy and to make it more inclusive, more audacious, and indeed more American. A true understanding of America does not ignore the blood-soaked truths. It doesn't invert its gaze from the ugliness, the brutality, the viciousness, the hate, the homophobia, the conscious degradation, the systematic exploitation, the anti-Semitism, and the bitter ironies and generational pain. Carter G. Woodson, the great author who wrote a wonderful book called The Miseducation of the Negro, said that the primary cause of human suffering is forgetfulness. History, if it's ignored, does not actually disappear. It can fester and rot like a cancer on the soul of a nation. It can tangle us up and constantly inhibit our advancement. It can undermine our commonalities and make one people seem separate from each other. It can divide us and push us towards our lowest common denominators or mutual despair. And more often than not, though, the history will rise up again and again and again until it's faced. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. And if we face our history, if we see the beauty of all Americans' people, especially those who are marginalized from history's story, the true beauty of our nation is revealed in its complexity, its delicacy, and even our current problems begin to seem more easy to grapple with. Again, it was James Baldwin said, "Whoever cannot tell himself the truth about his past is trapped in it, is immobilized in the prison of his undiscovered self. This is also true of nations," he writes. I often challenge audiences to think about why we in a room like this can all name the names of Natalie Holloway and JonBenet Ramsey, but we can't name the name of one black child that was murdered in America in an unsolved fashion. We have to confront our history. We have to know from whence we came if we are to discover the beauty of who we truly are as a complex and wondrous people. And so those who profess to love this country, a nation so in need of love, must then engage in that courageous, active relationship. We must engage in as much truth-telling as we can uncover. A truth-telling. To forget the fullness of our human past would cause Woodson's suffering. It will cause us to miss the wonders of who we are. We will begin to simply note our accomplishments in the most shallow of ways, simply talking about achievements in money or achievements in flying to the moon or limiting us to a simple set of dates and accomplishments. Kennedy warned about this, Robert Kennedy, in 1968, about what America was really going to stand for. He talked about the great task of confronting who we truly are and what is important to us as a nation. What are we going to exalt? He said to confront this, we must confront the lack of purpose and dignity. For too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community value in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product is now over $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising, an ambulance to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of redwoods and the loss of our national wonder. It counts chaotic squall. It counts napalm, and it counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifles and Speck's knives, and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the GNP does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of the education, or the joy of their play. It doesn't include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. It can tell us everything about America except why we are proud to be Americans. We whitewash our history, we sanitize it, and we homogenize it, and we lose the very wonders of what has made us distinct on this planet. we lose the truth and the glory of our common values, and we have the risk of descending into hedonism, into materialism, into narcissism. We have to examine the breadth and the truth, even in ways that make us feel uncomfortable. I love to see historians from generations ago and who often try to write about the truth. You read people like the great W.E.B. Du Bois, who wrote The Souls of Black Folk and talked about the periods of our history that we must begin to shine a brighter light on. Looking at our history, you see even U.S. presidents of old at times elevated themselves to tell the truth of our country, as difficult as it might be. Ulysses S. Grant was one of those men at a time who spoke so honestly about our war with Mexico. He said, generally, the officers of my army were indifferent about whether the annexation was consummated or not. For myself, I was bitterly opposed to the measure, and to this day regard the war which resulted as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. It was an instance of a republic following the bad example of European monarchies in not considering justice in their desire to acquire additional territory. Later, after he left the presidency, he even went stronger. He said, I had very strong opinions about the Mexican-American War. I do not think that there was ever a more wicked war than that which was waged by the United States on Mexico. I had a horror of the Mexican War, and I always believed that it was on our part most unjust. The wickedness was not in the way our soldiers conducted it, but in the conduct of our government in declaring the war in the first place. We had no claim on Mexico. Texas had no claim beyond the Nueces River, and yet we pushed to the Rio Grande and we crossed it. I'm always ashamed of my country when I think of that invasion. John Hope Franklin, Eric Foner, Nicholas Lehman, so many have written about chapters like this from our history. But yet we still seek to bury our history and engage too many times in repeating it in our presence or failing to learn the lessons that can unlock the secrets to our advancement. Talking about Reconstruction, a powerful historian wrote in a book called The Bloody Shirt, a bald fact: there were more than 3,000 freedmen and their white Republican allies who were murdered in a campaign of terrorist violence that overthrew the only representatively elected governments the Southern states would know for 100 years to come. Among the dead were state senators, judges, legislators, sheriffs, constables, mayors, county commissioners, and other office holders whose only crime was to have been elected. They were lynched by bands of disguised men who dragged them from cabins by night. So saturated is our collective memory with the Gone with the Wind stock characters of thieving carpetbaggers, ignorant Negroes, and low scallywags that it comes as a shock not so much to discover that there were men and women of courage and idealism, rectitude and vision who risked everything to try to build a new society of equality and justice on the ruins of the Civil War, who fought to give lasting meaning to the sacrifices of the terrible struggle, who gave their fortunes, careers, happiness, and lives to make real the simple and long-delayed American promise. It comes as a shock not so much to be confronted by their idealism and courage and uprightness, as by the realization that they were convinced up to the very last that they would succeed. Confident in the rightness of the cause, backed by the military might of the United States government, secure in the ringing declarations, now the supreme law of the land embodied in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution, that not only was slavery dead, but that equality and the right to vote were the patrimony now of all Americans. They could not imagine that their nation could win such a terrible war and lose the enduring peace. Here we have chapters of our history where men and women stood up with such courage and honor to fight for our very principles, but we whitewash it in our books. We bury it, the truth of what happened. Tens of thousands of Americans murdered and beaten, pulled away from their offices, pulled away from their homes, intimidated to yielding against democracy to terrorism. We all know about the Boston Massacre. It's part of our common legend and lore. But there's so many other massacres in our nation that we don't even know the names of, that we don't even talk about. From Native Americans who were slaughtered in numbers that we care not to think about, to men and women who fought to organize unions and were beaten down with a viciousness and severity that caused massive deaths. In the Reconstruction period, in a short period of time, there were numerous massacres that have names that few know about. The Hamburg Massacre or the Ellington Massacre in South Carolina, or the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana, and countless other atrocities where groups of African American men, simply seeking to vote, to affirm their values, men and women who were slaughtered indiscriminately in the name of terrorism and subjugation. There was a judge named Albion Tory in Ohio. He was born there and moved to North Carolina and became a judge that did many things. He tried to use equal justice to face blacks and whites and to deal with their issues, but got continuous threats from the Ku Klux Klan. He stated at the end of Reconstruction that in all except the actual results of the physical struggle, I consider the South to have been the real victors in the masterly way in which they have brought about these results, the way in which they have neutralized the results of the war and reversed the verdict of Appomattox is the greatest thing in American politics. I talked about Ulysses S. Grant talking about his shame in the Mexican-American War, but the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, when the North gave up on the South and allowed those times where African Americans in our country were being elected to the highest levels of governance to come to a shocking close and to have the disenfranchisement of millions of Americans, is still a chapter of our history that's not talked about, fleshed about, confronted. It's still a chapter of our history that has a direct connection to the results and to the life that we're seeing now. You can't disentangle American history, pulling out certain chapters and not realizing that that whole will become a vacuum that will have an effect on the modern day. And you can't disentangle a history in a way that separates different Americans from each other. We are joined in a common cloth of destiny. In truth, there is no black history. It is American history. There is no Irish history. It is American history. There's no Japanese American history. It is American history. The woman before me right now wrote in Playing in the Dark that Africanism is inextricable from the definition of Americanness, from its origins on through its integrated or disintegrated 20th century self. And Baldwin added, whatever white people do not know about Negroes reveals precisely and inexorably what they do not know about themselves. We have a common history. To deny it is to our common peril. One of the other things we must resist is this desire to deify individuals within our history, to lift them up and exalt them in a way that, again, sanitizes them of all weaknesses or faults or foibles, that lifts them so high that it's almost as if God himself sent down not just one child, but others to serve in the American story. David McCullough wrote, the miracle was that imperfect mortals could so rise to the occasion that such noble deeds and brilliant political leadership came to the fore as it did. Indeed, from our founding fathers to everyone throughout our history, we see, if we study more closely, contradictions that are so, so valuable. Cornel West talks about a term that I have used much and often and got me my first appearance on Stephen Colbert when I mentioned in a national interview about the Santa Clausification of Martin Luther King. Indeed, we think of King now as a postage stamp figure, and we drain him of all his humanity and see him as such a simplistic term and don't remember that he was a complicated man that took unpopular decisions. We also don't talk about the fact that he had many African American leaders of renowned dignity and strength, like Ella Baker, who were firm and consistent critics of King and some of his tactics. We must know the nuances of our history and resist the temptation to create convenient heroes. The story of Helen Keller is a perfect example. We all think of this profound person who overcame blindness and being deaf, But we fail to understand the truth and the complexity and the depth and the breadth of who she was. That she became an individual that was one of the most staunch, outspoken advocates for workers and for the poor. That she did not simply fit in our American political philosophy, but extolled the virtues of socialism. She was a woman that was banned and blacklisted and fought against by newspapers and politicians because of her seemingly outrageous views and her insistency to use her celebrity to advance causes. History cannot allow us to create convenient stories of any character. We must continue to examine the truth of who we are and of who the figures of history are, but more purposefully understand that ordinary people are the true ones that tell the best history of our country. I have 2 statues of Harriet Tubman on my desk in Newark, and I do that because of many reasons. But one of the things I like to remind myself of is that Harriet Tubman, towards the end of her life, was not this renowned figure in history that she is now. She was somebody that faced extreme difficulties, and if it wasn't for some people writing her story at the end of her life, she would have, like so many of the thousands of Americans, black and white, who worked on the Underground Railroad, she would be names that we would not know, stories that we would not tell. At the end of her life, she wrote a letter to Frederick Douglass asking for his assistance because she was facing poverty, asking for his help. And Douglass, the profound statesman, wrote back saying, "The difference between us is very marked. Most of what I have done and suffered is in the service of our cause, has been in public, and I have received much encouragement at every step of the way. You, on the other hand, have labored in a private way. I have wrought in the day, you in the night. I have had the applause of the crowd and the satisfaction that comes of being approved by the multitude, while the most that you have done has been witnessed by a few trembling, scared, and footsore bondmen and women, whom you have led out of the house of bondage, and whose heartfelt God bless you has been your only reward. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witness of your devotion to freedom and of your heroism. I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than you have. Much that you have done would seem improbable to those who do not know you. It is to me a great pleasure and a great privilege to now bear testimony to your character and your works, and to say those to whom you may come that I regard you in every way, truthful and trustworthy." These are the people who made America, whose names that we don't know. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not witnessed by history's pages. These people who are often marginalized or forgotten about, who had the most humble of lives, but who never gave up on the dreams of America. Standing on the dark, I think of the words of ONeill Hershey, who said, "They seemed to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God." These are the people who carried us forward every single year, generation. It's the power of ordinary people doing the extraordinary. These are the folks who were the conscience of our country, demanding that the very ideals that we put forth are lived up to. People like Carrie, Chapman, Catt, that few people, even college students, could name, one of the great workers in the suffrage movement. She called America to conscience using America's words alone. The maxim of the Declaration were once called fundamental principles of government. They are now called American principles or even Americanisms. They have become the slogans of every movement towards political liberty around the world, of every effort to widen the suffrage for men or women in any land. Not a people or a race or a class striving for freedom is there anywhere in the world that has not made our axioms the chief weapon of the struggle. More, all men and women the world around, with far-sighted vision into the varieties of things, know that the world tragedy of our day is not being waged over the assassination of an archduke, nor commercial competition, nor national bias, nor the freedom of the seas. It is the death of those principles at home. We are a nation where people did not stop believing in the spirit of America. It was more profound than the very documents of our founding. Documents like the Declaration of Independence that referred to Native Americans as savages. Documents like the Declaration that refer to African Americans as fractions of being. The spirit of America is a spirit that transcended even the limitations of our very documents to achieve a higher calling to which America, I believe, is destined. It is the spirit of our country. It is the courage and the love of generations before us that have defined what it means to be an American and that call on us to reach that. One of our great American judges, learned hands, wrote this on I Am an American Day. What do we mean when we say, the first of all, we seek liberty? I often wonder whether we do not rest our hopes too much upon the Constitution, on laws and courts. These are false hopes. Believe me, these are false hopes. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no Constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. While it lies there, it needs no Constitution, no law, no court to save it. And what is this liberty, which must lie in the hearts of men and women? It is not the ruthless, the unbridled will. It is not the freedom to do as one likes. That is the denial of liberty and leads straight to its overthrow. A society in which men and women recognize no check upon the freedom soon becomes a society where freedom is a possession of only a savage few. What then is the spirit of liberty? I cannot define it. I can only tell you my own faith. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is a spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other great men and women. The spirit of liberty is a spirit which weighs their interests along the side of others without bias. The spirit of liberty remembers that not even a sparrow falls to the earth unheeded. This is the spirit that we must now exalt. This is the spirit that commands us to tell the truth about who we are. This is the spirit that calls to us for courage and for love. This is the spirit that George Washington Carver talked about, that no individual has any right to come into the world and go out of it without leaving behind them some distinct and legitimate reasons for having passed through it. It's Martin Delany that says we must make an issue, create an event, or establish a national position for ourselves and never expect to be respected as men and women until we have undertaken some fearless, bold, and adventurous deeds of daring, contending against every odd, regardless of every consequence. And so I live in a fortunate time to be surrounded by individuals in my city who remind me through their truth-telling, who remind me through their patriotism, who remind me through their courage and love that we must see history in a different light than the history we see so often extolled or exalted by shallow, narrow American patriotism. That if we give light to the fullness of our history, to the richness of it, if we give light to the history that is in the hearts of generations of individuals, the spirit becomes bolder, the nation becomes brighter. If we shine lights in the corners and tell those dark truths, we illuminate further the very torch of the American dream. If we turn our ears then to our founding documents and our most famous speeches, they stop from being narrow documents, even fuller, richer, bolder words. Abraham Lincoln said some words that are so powerful in the moment and historical context in which they're written, but if you understand the power of love, the connectedness that exists between human beings, that supersedes time and space, you begin to see the power of these words. He said, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, nor can we consecrate, nor can we hallow this ground. The brave men, living or dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond and above our own power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who have fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. This is the story of all of America. And this is the story that we must begin to tell. We live in such complicated times. We are still so divided as a people at a time where our nation now more than ever needs our unity. We are at a perilous point in our country's history, faced and fraught with challenges, but I believe, and I have a deep, abiding faith in our capacity to overcome our challenges and manifest our truth and unite our people and achieve what our ancestors so strongly sought. And so, back to the Star-Spangled Banner, and me standing on a field surrounded by tens of thousands of people. And I was moved in the same way when Jennifer Hudson sang the song as when an arts high school student sings it in Newark. It is the center song in the most powerful playlist in humanity. If you close your eyes and listen, and you open your heart with courage and love, you can hear all of the music. You can hear our ancestors sing the song of America. You can hear the freedom song of Irish immigrants in sweltering northeastern cities. You can hear the stirring freedom songs of slaves and oppressive heat of the southern plantations. You can hear the penetrating poetry of a Maya Angelou or the sagacious prose of a Ralph Waldo Emerson. If you close your eyes, you can hear the song of America, its truth and its breath, its pain and its dignity. You can hear the zydeco and the bluegrass, the country, the blues, the rock and roll, the hip hop. You can hear the funk. You can hear the cadence of marching feet, people marching to work, to school, to fields, to factories, to battlegrounds, both domestic and abroad. You can hear the rhythmic heartbeat of millions of Americans yearning, pushing, fighting, dreaming for freedom, for justice, for respect, for recognition, dreaming and yearning that America will be. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, the Indians, the Negro, me. Who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain must bring back our mighty dream again. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Close your eyes and hear the richness of Irving Berlin's God Bless America. The raw power of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. The real meaning of the exaltation of Sly and the Family Stone when they sang about the glory and the dignity of everyday people. You can stand clearly if you listen with Marvin Gaye and ask the Socratic question, America, what's going on? And you can join with James Weldon Johnston's demand that we lift every voice and sang to a chorus of commitment, sang to a symphony of sacrifice, sang to an audacious anthem of awesome advancement against adversaries of avarice, ignorance, and hatred. We are a nation where the children of slaves and slave owners still come together and pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, where children of the rich and the poor have faith in the republic for which it stands, where even those who were so fiercely marginalized still believe us to be one nation, under God, indivisible, and where children coast to coast, a chorus of kids, say proudly that there must be liberty and justice for us all. God bless America, for a pilgrim's pride to Native Americans who died. God bless America, from the low ground of national pain and ignominy and hate to our common high ground of love, light, and courage. God bless America. And now we, who are called by the names of our ancestors, we Americans, we who wave the banner of their glory, of their sacrifice, of their pain, we Americans who drank deeply from wells that we did not dig. We Americans who eat the fruit of trees that we did not plant. We Americans who enjoy the bountiful harvest from fields that we neither tilled nor sowed. We Americans must fulfill our common destiny, confront the past and future with unyielding courage and tireless love. It is our turn now to give our measure of sacrifice for the dream. It is now our turn to sing a song of America that is unyielding, that is demanding, that is insistent that this country that has not been yet lift up and sing louder and stronger to peace, to freedom, to justice, to love, that we as Americans will not just exalt those at center stage, but will look into cities and urban areas and see the glory and the greatness of the women who still stand on street corners and call people to tables to register them to vote. We Americans must look to our unfinished business, to our pain and to the agony, to the poverty yet not banished from our land, and manifest our glory. This is the song that we must now sing. It's a song about our past that is true. It is a song about our present that is honest. And it is a song about our future that holds the aspirations and the hopes and dreams of generations unborn. This is why I am proud to be an American. We have work to do. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night to talking to you more about that work. Thank you.